Hi, my name is Ruth Ann. Welcome back to my channel. I'm from Abundant Blooms Flower Farm in Dora, Michigan. I'm going into my 6th year of flower farming, and here on this channel we focus on looking at a flower farm from the lens of selling flowers to florists, because that's what I do. I'm so happy to be out in my hoop house, which is from Nifty Hoops, if you're wondering. You see my snapdragons in the background, so there's actually green things in here along with other stuff. So today I'm going to be talking about peonies. I did a previous video how to harvest them and how to store them or dry store them, or how I dry store them. If you have been enjoying my content and you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe. It's really helpful to my channel, and like this video and share it with a flower farming friend. That would be such an honor to me if you would do that. And thank you to everyone that has already done that. And if you haven't done so, download my free tips for selling flowers to florists. I have a guide. You can click that in the description below, and it'll give you great tips for selling flowers to florists. And it's actually really pretty helpful. And I've heard good feedback on it. So we are going to jump right in today. So how do you harvest peonies? Or and I did touch on this in the last video, but when are peonies mature? So I just want you to know, for me, I live in zone 6A. My last frost here in Michigan is about May 15th, and our first frost in the fall is October 15th. So that's our growing window. And for us, typically, my sides are growing up on my hoop. Peonies are more of a June flower. Sometimes in late May we'll have some, or if we have an early spring, we'll have peonies in late May. We did last year. We had a very early spring. We also had a very, very warm winter. And I was out looking at my peonies. You can kind of see we have some snow on the ground in patches. And so part of my field is uncovered. And I actually just saw some of my very first peonies starting to emerge, which was super exciting. So they're really tough. So peonies are super tough plant. They are hardy to like zone 2. I mean, obviously people are growing them in Alaska, and I actually used to live in Alaska, and so that was really fun to have this really super cold hardy plant. And not only do they grow there, but they actually thrive there. Like, they love the nice cold winters. So the problem is people have a hard time growing them in the warmer climates. So like, my in-laws live in Central California. It's actually very difficult to grow a peony there. You can do it kind of, certain varieties. I've heard people say they live in the Bay Area, but further south, like that's pretty much as far south in California as you can even try to grow a peony. They just don't have enough cold hours. So peonies are a northern thing, and they're really, really great. So if you're familiar, or perhaps you're not familiar with Frank and Pamela Arnowski, they have a big flower farm in the hill country of Texas, which is funny because I've also lived in San Antonio. I was in the military, if you're wondering why I've lived in all these places. And you cannot grow a peony there. So the Arnowskis have a big flower farm in Texas, and they actually bought land in Minnesota, in northern Minnesota, so they could grow peonies, and then they ship them down to their Texas farm. Isn't that funny? So I live in the north, and we have the great privilege and blessing and delight of growing peonies here easily. We can easily grow peonies here. And I think we're going to talk about pricing in this video also. Actually, I've already had people say, you don't charge enough for your peonies, and yeah, so it's hotly debated. We're going to get into that. Don't worry. But we can grow them really quite easily in Michigan. They are really everywhere. Like, when they're in bloom, you'll see them everywhere. People just have old bushes of peonies all over the place. And it's pretty fun. When I was a little girl, we lived in New Jersey, and my mother had peonies along the side of our house in New Jersey. And I just really always remember every spring watching them, because they grow so quickly. And when you're a flower farmer, you're like, aren't these things ever going to bloom? Like, their buds are still hard as a rock. But as a girl, I remember me and my sister watching them grow and get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then get these massive blooms. And it just was really fun. And then we watched all the ants crawl on them. So I have some really sweet childhood memories of peonies, and it definitely was a flower that I always wanted to grow. So a little synopsis about why to grow peonies. I think you should grow them because they're profitable, and we are going to get into those numbers at the end. And if you want to know what to plant, or what I plant, or what varieties I recommend, check out that first video that I did earlier. I'll put a link to it in the description. When do you harvest peonies? So peonies are harvested in what is called the marshmallow bud stage. So they are not open. You should be able to tell what color they are, and you literally feel them, and you'll feel them go from they're hard as a rock, and then they'll go to being a little bit softer and a little bit softer. Watch every peony bloom and are like, is this too far? And it's a really specific stage. And if it's warm, those peonies can go from pretty hard to marshmallow or blown open very quickly. Or when it's peony harvest, you need to be at your farm all the time, harvesting 3 times a day. That sounds really extreme, but it's not. You will harvest at night before you go to bed, and in the morning you'll get up and you'll be like, how is this possible? There's so many plumes out here. And so you're gonna need to harvest 3 times a day, particularly if it's a warm June day, which it easily can be. I mean, this is like early summer. It can be very warm. It can be 90 degrees here in June, in the beginning of June, or it could be 50. But so you've got to know that you need to be available. So that's when you harvest them. It's called marshmallow stage. It is something you kind of have to get a feel for, but once you feel it, you're like, oh yeah, that's right. So, and you got to harvest 3 times a day. I know it sounds wild, but it's true. That's fun. It's a really fun time. It is a short season, so you got to do this, but it's only for like 2 or 3 weeks. So you just have to, not go anywhere or do anything exciting for 2 or 3 weeks, and then you'll be fine. It'll be fine. So that's peony season. Okay, so that's how you harvest them. Now, how do you store them? So one very important, like the initial part of storing them, is your peonies have to be dry, which often they're not when you harvest them, because you're harvesting them in the rain potentially. And for sure, with like in Michigan, we get really heavy dew in the morning, like every day. So it's very important that they be like bone dry. You do not want to put your flowers with any kind of moisture in your cooler. So often what I'm doing is I have like towels laid out in my kitchen table or in the garage or something on tables, and I'm putting fans on them, and I lay them out to dry. I never put them in water when I cut them because I'm storing them dry. I pretty much store all of my peonies dry, even if I'm selling them, within a couple days. It just keeps everything standard. So I store them dry. I never put them in water. If it's midday and you're harvesting and they're dry, you're good to go. That's fine. But otherwise, I'm storing them dry. So you got to make sure they're bone dry before you put them in the cooler, or you will get mold, and then you won't be able to sell them. So that's the first thing. Make sure they're bone dry. Then it's really pretty simple. I strip the leaves off, so all I have is the bud, which is in marshmallow stage, and then I just keep them by variety, and I store them in bulb crates. They're kind of the perfect length for bulb crates, and then I usually do like 10 with their heads this way, and then 10 this way, 10, 10, 10, right? And you just kind of fill it up. And I can fit about 100 to 120 peonies in a bulb crate. I usually line the bulb crate with like craft paper or newspaper if you have it, something like that. Like that's not a bad idea, particularly if you're going to be dry storing them for a long time. Usually initially you're getting them in out of the field. But then what I typically do is I go back and I can take them out of the cooler, particularly if I already know I've sold, these for this date for a wedding. So I will wrap them in 10s or 50s or something and just mark, and then I usually wrap them in craft paper, because you want to keep them from drying out in the cooler, but you also want to keep them, you want them to be breathable. So that's what I do. And then you can store them for weeks. Different varieties I have found store better than others. In my experience, Coral Charms do not store as well. I don't know if it's just because they're single and they're a little more fragile, or I'm not sure, but they have not stored as long for me. I also haven't really needed to store them long because they certainly sell very quickly. But like Sarah Bernhardt's, I was selling Sarah Bernhardt's into mid-July, and we had the earliest spring we've ever had here in Michigan. Sarah Bernhardt's are also the latest blooming peony. But I stored them a solid 6 weeks, and I kept testing them. Like, are these going to be okay? Are they going to be okay? And people kept wanting them, and I had a lot of Sarah Bernhardt's. So people kept buying them, and this one florist used them in a wedding in July, and they were phenomenal. She was like, they were amazing. So I would not sell them retail. Like, I would not store them and sell them retail because the vase life is decreased. But if you're using them for an event, like for sure, go for it. Like I said, just vase test it and make sure there's no mold, because no matter what you do, you could potentially still have mold. So I just look at every bloom and make sure there's no mold on it. Like I check it before I'm selling it out to a florist for sure after I've stored them for that long. But I did store a whole bunch of Duchess de Numenors for the very end of June, and I found mold on like 3 of them. Like there was a couple that were questionable, and I obviously didn't sell those. Pretty much fine, but I don't want to sell something that's even questionable. But yeah, so after I did that and stored those for 4 weeks, they really looked really great. So, but I have had florists complain about other farmers peonies because they had mold on them. So that's definitely a thing. Like, if you don't treat them correctly when you harvest them and get them bone dry, you can have mold on them, and then you're not going to be able to dry store them for any length of time, or you're not going to be able to sell them. They're going to get moldy. That's how I store them. But you can store them at like sub-zero, so it's like 31 degrees, and you can store them for months. So maybe I'll try that this year in my chest cooler. I don't know. We'll see. But John Dole has done some really great research about that. So it is possible to store them for a long time. The other thing that's possible is if you put low covers over your low tunnels over your peonies, you can get them earlier. I've considered doing that. I've never done it. I probably will in the future. I've kind of set up my one planting of peonies to be able to do that with, because potentially for me in Michigan, I could get Mother's Day blooms, and that would be like pretty phenomenal, and I could charge more for that. I've never done it though. So if you've done low tunnels over your peonies, I'd love to hear your experience in the comments. The other thing is when your peonies are in bud stage, certain varieties, not every variety does this, but certain varieties get these little, like you'll have a main bud and you'll have all these little side buds, and there's this hot debate. Do you pluck those off and just keep the one bud, or do you let them all go? I am a pretty firm believer in plucking the little buds on the side buds off. And here's my reasoning. I am selling to florists. If you're selling retail or you're selling at a farmer's market, it might not be worth the labor to you, and your end customer actually might prefer it. So, because they will continue to open, some of them especially will. So I think it depends on your end customer. I don't. I pluck them off, or I don't keep them. I pluck them off because my end customer is wedding and event florists, and they want like the biggest, best, most beautiful bloom. They don't want those side shoots. So, and I sell to a bunch of florists who also buy peonies from other local growers, and there's one local grower that has a lot of peonies, and I've heard a lot of complaints about those peonies, and my florist was showing them to me, and she was like, I don't know what she does. I don't know why yours are so much better. I'm like, I don't know. I feel like I just do industry standards, and I have no idea what this other lady's practice is. Oh, there's my cat. But I looked, so what was happening was for her, the main bud was shattering. And then the only thing that was good was some of these side shoots were still kind of okay. But that she was having to clip off the main bloom for everyone. And these were the white peonies and these were the white peonies. I told the story in the last video. She desperately wanted white peonies from me, and I had sold out, so she was buying them from this other lady she didn't really want to buy them from. She was fussing about how bad they were. So I looked at them and I was like, well, maybe if she would pluck off those side shoots, like that would give her better quality. I don't know, but my florists kind of rave about my peony quality, and I don't want to change it. And I've plucked them off, and I really do believe that it gives me a better quality single stem, and that's what I'm going for, because I'm selling to florists. Like I said, if you're selling retail or a farmer's market, your customers might prefer the other way. So I think it just depends on your market. You can do it either way, but that's what I do for selling to florists. Now we're going to get into pricing, and we're all going to get really excited here. So pricing. So I sell my peonies for $2.50 a stem. I like to sell them in 10 stem bunches, but I pretty much, I will sell them in 5s. So because they're relatively inexpensive flowers. So if a florist needs 22 for a wedding, I'm not going to make her buy 30. I will sell her 25. And I have a bunch of florists that want not a bunch. I have two florists, I would say, that take between 20 and 25 weekly while they're in season. They just want them for their shop, and they go through that many. So I'm happy to sell them 25. I'm not going to say you have to buy 30. Just, they're a higher expense flower. So, but I typically sell them in 10s. On my Rooted Farmer, they're listed in 10, but I'm not going to sell 22. I've got to sell them in 5s or 10s. I can't keep track of 22. That's not going to work for me. And they're okay with that. They understand. So they're not a single stem thing. I don't sell them by a single stem. So I charge $2.50 a stem. So I think there's a lot of things that go into pricing a peony. First of all, I am not the lowest priced farmer in West Michigan. I am also not the highest priced farmer. There's other people near me that are charging a lot. And I don't think they're selling them. In fact, I know they're not selling them all. Yeah, they're trying to charge $4 a stem for them, and they've got tons and tons of them, and they're not selling them. They're not moving them, because it's really, really not the price around here. And that's because there's a lot of people with their own peonies, and they're in season here. They're easy to grow here, Pretty much once your peony is large enough to shade out the weeds, like you don't even have to weed it. A relatively low maintenance perennial after the first, I would say 2 years, where you really do have to weed them a lot, at least in my area. And I do weed prevention. Like I have them either planted in landscape fabric or with mulch around them. So I am doing some weed prevention. But after the first couple of years, 2 years, I would say, they're definitely big enough to hold their own. You do have to water them. I did talk about this in the last video. You do have to water them during drought periods in June or in July and August, particularly when they're setting eyes for the following year. But they really are a low maintenance perennial. You never have to split them. So for me, you spend $5 on a bare root, and every year that plant is going to get better and better, sending up 20, 30, 40, 50 stems that are cuttable. So if you sell 50 stems off of a plant, like off of one plant, if you're selling peonies for $2.50 and you get 20 stems per plant, that's $50 from one plant. Now that's pretty conservative. If you have a more mature peony and you're going to be getting 30 stems and you're selling them for $2.50, you're getting $75 per peony bush. I've actually considered charging more for something like a coral charm because I get so many less stems per plant. Like I'm getting 7 and my Duchess de Numenors are getting 25. Well, that plant is not nearly as, valuable to me. If you're selling really specialty, like what are those specialty varieties? I don't grow them. Yeah, you should charge more for them. Absolutely. But when you're growing like regular $5 to $7 to $10 bare root peonies, yeah, I think charging $2.50 is very reasonable. It's reasonable for the florist. I mean, if you're doing something special to them and you're going to be putting them in sub-zero temperature and storing them till August, yeah, charging more. If you're going to be putting low covers on them and getting them earlier, yeah, charge $3 or $4. But if you're selling them, and I do get people are like, well, they're a high-end flower and different things. Now, also I want to say, if you're growing in a different area than me and your peonies are really high risk and you lose half of them, they're diseased, you live in a hot climate, you've got to grow certain varieties, you've got to do all these time-consuming things, you're going to have to charge more to make them profitable. So I totally get that. Or if nobody has peonies near you and they're a real novelty and they're a pain to grow, then you're going to have to charge more. That's not the case for me in Michigan. They're everywhere. They grow really, really well. They're hard to kill unless you rot them out. But they're really not that hard to grow. So I find charging $2.50 a stem profitable. Like I said, $2.50 to $3 there, or $2.75 for, and potentially I would charge more. Or like if I had a specialty like etched salmon or something, I would charge $3. So, but I think between $2.50 and $3, that's what my market will stand. I also know places like Chicago, the market's kind of flooded, or I've heard people in Detroit, flower farmers in Detroit, say they can't get more than $1 a stem for them. I think that's really outrageously low. And then you really have to decide, are they profitable to grow if I can only get $1 a stem for them? I also know retail farmers are selling them for $2 to $3 a stem here in Michigan. So, I think it's just where we live. But for me, you could say, oh, well, I can't sell them for $4 or $5 a stem. Well, okay, but they're also really easy to grow here. So I don't have the inputs that somebody else might have. So that's kind of my spiel about pricing and profitability. I think they're very profitable. Great, because I can store them and sell them for weeks. I have had demand for them. Last year I sold all of them except maybe a couple of my Sarah Bernhardt's. But I had a massive demand for white flowers. I talked about that in the previous video. That I couldn't supply. I didn't have enough. If you want to know about what I grow, when I started them, how to grow a peony, go back to my first video. I'll put a link in the comments again, and it'll talk all about that. But yeah, let me know in the comments, what's your experience with peonies? How do they sell really well for you? Can you not sell them? Are they super hard to grow? Just let me know. I'd love to know where you're coming from and where you're at and what your struggles with peonies have been. So that's all I have today about peonies. Thanks for joining me. I actually love talking about peonies. I love peonies. I've really enjoyed investing in them and growing them. So thanks for hanging around with me. Please subscribe if you haven't. Download those tips for selling flowers to florists. And big announcement, I have a course coming out. I talked about this in the last video, but I have a course coming out about how to sell flowers to florists. So download those tips for selling flowers to florists, and you will be on my email list, so you will not miss a thing about when that course is coming out in February, super soon. I am working so hard on it, and I'm hoping to get it done here really quickly. There's my little flower child. Where is she? Right there. Are you talking to the flowers? Are you stepping on the ranunculus? You can't jump over it, so you had to step on them? Oh, That's a good idea. That's all for today, folks. Bye. Thanks for joining me.